There's a good boy. Okay. Hello everyone, hello and welcome back to Ask Ethys, the show where I answer your Final Fantasy XIV lore questions to the best of my knowledge and the best of the information that we have presently available. Now, just as last time, we're going to be taking these questions from the patrons and Twitch subs channel in our Discord server. So thank you very much, of course, for the support, but as well for the contribution of some really excellent questions. So without any further preamble, our first question comes from Fenchan, who absolutely knows the way to my heart in asking, how is Gaius killing Aseans? Specifically, I believe he had a red mask on his belt. If Sundered Aseans are fairly easy to kill, how come Nabriale's defeat was such a big plot point? So first of all, we should give this question some context. Gaius Van Belsar, after 2.0, having been betrayed and honestly humiliated by Laha Brea, decided to dedicate the rest of his life to hunting down and destroying the Aseans, partly for the vendetta, but also partly having realized that they were ultimately machinating and pulling the strings of his precious Garlemald. Solus Zos Galvus was of course Gaius's hero, and I imagine he must have learned after 5.0 now that he was in fact M itself, which I'm sure has done little to dissuade him from his course. The weapons questline with Sorrow of Whirlit is honestly just a temporary diversion for Gaius's ultimate work. Now, when Fenchan asks how is he killing Aseans, we have to ask ourselves what exactly we mean by killing Aseans, whether he's killing them in the way that we kill Laha Brea in 2.0 by detaching him from the mortal form that he's taken and sending his soul back to the rift, or whether we mean killing them as in permanently killing them, like, we did to Igayorm, Nabriales, like Forden did to Laha Brea, and most recently we did to Emet-Selch and Elidibus. And I suspect that what Gaius has been doing is actually the former, and I think we have some pretty compelling evidence for that. Gaius does have a number of masks on his belt. First of all, he has the mask from his visor, from his old helmet. Then he has, I believe, 3 black masks from the Asean underlings, and then he has 2 red masks, which is from the higher Asean convocation members. I'll put up a screenshot of the masks here to sort of help visualize this, but one of them in particular has a very sort of feline feature. It looks like a lion mask. And something that is important to understand here, which I suspect a lot of people haven't realized, is that the Aseans' masks actually relate to the zodiac symbol with which they're associated. So Nabriales, for instance, is associated with Scorpio, and he has a kind of scorpion visage to his mask. Igayorm was associated with, I think, Sagittarius, and basically her mask depicts a drawn bow and arrow. Laha Brea is Pisces, and his is a little less obvious, but it certainly has a very kind of a fish-like quality to it. So who is going to have a lion mask? Well, naturally it'd be the Asean associated with Leo, which is, of all people, Fandaniel. Now this has a number of possibilities and a number of, I think, quite interesting consequences. Firstly, it seems that Gaius is not outright destroying Aseans. He's going around and, killing their mortal bodies, sending them back to the rift. I like to think that he's sort of spawn camping, right? That he knows that he can't permanently destroy them, but he knows that, if he dedicates all of his time to killing them over and over and over and over again, they're never going to have time to fulfill any of their nefarious plots, right? Because as soon as they pop into another body, he's going to show up and do him in again. So either he's doing that, or else he did destroy Fandaniel, and Fandaniel that we know has been just sort of recently raised from, an average mortal jabroni to a convocation seat through the restoration of his second-hand memories, the account of, Fan Daniel's original personage as recorded onto the Zodiac Stone by Emmett Selk. Gaius may have the means to destroy an Asean outright in a similar fashion as we've been doing with the White Aura Sight and the Blade of Light. It's certainly conceivable that there could be a sort of Magitech equivalent to that solution, and if anyone else was going to find such a solution, it would be Gaius Van Belsar. I mean, we say, it seems that the Sundered Aseans are fairly easy to kill. I wouldn't say that just because Gaius is killing them makes them easy to be killed. Gaius is a peerless warrior. He's a war hero in Garlemald. There are very, very, very few people in the world outside of ourselves that could contend with him. In 1.0, he actually fought all of the Sharlians at once and held his own quite handily. I think it was only Ida that actually managed to get a single hit on him. So Gaius is absolutely no joke. But more to the point, the second part of Fenchan's question is specifically how come Nabriali's defeat was such a big plot point. And it was a big plot point because we weren't just killing his mortal body. We weren't just sending this immortal soul back to the rift where he could, briefly recuperate and then come back and take on another form and another form and another form. We were effectively, as we understand now, we were sundering him. We were trapping his soul and disintegrating it, grinding it down into dust, into its constituent particles, and scattering them across the live stream where he could no longer coalesce, basically. And that's the really big plot point. Aseans have been killed before through history, no doubt many times, but Nabriales was the first time that they were rendered mortal, as far as we know. And that was a huge plot point for us, but it was also a huge plot point for them. Now, we also have a couple of questions here about the Echo, which are largely speculative, but I still think very interesting questions and ones that are definitely worth speaking to. So I think I'll be able to touch on all the questions that we've had about the Echo by addressing level 39 Nerd's question and then just kind of, rambling on about it, as I am wont to do. Level 39 Nerd asks, Fordola was able to predict Elisa's attacks because of the resonance, and I think it was somewhere implied that we, as the Warrior of Light, can see AoE markers of enemies because of the Echo as well. How does that make sense? I'll speak to the second part first. I think it was at a live letter Q&A. I think it was one of the segments for Between Two Ferns, which is a panel that Koji does pretty much every FanFest, which for one segment he takes some pre-submitted questions from people that are attending FanFest, and someone was asking about this, right? Was kind of, I suppose, some sort of like head canon attempt to firm up some ludonarrative dissonance, right? We always want to have in-game explanation, like in-world explanations for things that happen, in the video game, in like video game logic, right? Like, who are these other 7 people that are with us? How is it that we're able to see AoE markers? And this wasn't confirmed as canon by any means, and I personally think it's important to maintain some sort of suspension of disbelief when it comes to sort of, I guess, reconciling points of dissonance in a medium like video games, because there's always going to be a level of dissonance there between the plot and the action. You could, for your own headcanon, think like, okay, I have the Echo, I'm able to sort of predict things a couple of seconds ahead. That seems to be what Fordola can do and why she's such an effective combatant. And I'm going to kind of like think of that as a way to kind of explain and bridge this gap for myself in regards to, mechanics in fights. But it's not something that is canon, and people just kind of like picked up that theory and ran with it, and now speak about it as though it is like firmly established canon, which is a mistake. As for what's going on with the Echo, a couple of people have asked variations of the question how the Echo manifests differently in different people, how that makes sense. How is it that there are some features of the Echo that are common with everyone that has it, and others that seem to be like wildly different? And we haven't been given a precise, specific in-game explanation for this, because whatever explanation we'd be given would be based on stuff that we've only learned very, very recently, and that no one would really understand other than the unsundered Aseans, which obviously can't answer these questions for us anymore. The important thing to remember, particularly in Shadowbringers, is that everything comes down to memory, and the Echo is no exception, and is perhaps the greatest example of this, right? The star shower and the way it triggers the Echo is explained to us as if it's a memory that is imprinted so deeply on our soul, a kind of inherited memory, a kind of ancestral memory, a memory that has kind of persisted, again, like imprinted so firmly and so dramatically on our anima that whoever inherits this soul, however many times this soul is recycled through the ages, there's still that scar on it from the final days. And anyone that sees the star shower, they're sort of awakened to that. They suddenly awaken to an echo of their ancient pre-sundered self. Now, the reason why there's a variance in the powers of people that have the Echo is precisely because there was a variance in the powers of the ancients. As we've seen through Tales from the Shadows in particular, not all of the Amaritines were equally powerful. They all had some mastery of creation magics. There were things that there were powers that they had in common, but they also had their own specialties. They had their own interests. They had things that they were, particularly good at. Like Hades had this particular sort of resonance with the dead, for instance. La Brea was very good with fire. And I think you can see what I'm sort of getting at here is that when we have characters like Kryl or Mikoto that have these special powers that coalesce when they awaken to the Echo, it's probably because they were special powers, special abilities that were possessed by their ancient counterparts. Now, another really interesting thing here is, of course, not everyone that sees the star shower develops the Echo. And that can be a little difficult to reconcile if we are under the impression that everyone alive today is a shard of an ancient person. That is not actually the case as far as we know. Even before the Sundering, there were two distinct categories of people. There were the ancients, and then there were these new lives that came after the summoning of Zodiac. As we know, half of all of the Amaritines were sacrificed to summon Zodiac, and after Zodiac was summoned and rewrote the laws of the star, whatever that means, these new lives came about that were less dense. The Amaritines, the Aseans, were already kind of thinking of them as these like lesser beings, the way they kind of look at us, and they were planning on sacrificing them to bring back the ancients. So it seems that the souls that were fed to Zodiac were ground down into their ethereal atomism and scattered throughout the life stream, so that when that anima formed new souls, they weren't these like discrete kind of chunks of, well, this guy's been reborn here and that guy's been reborn there, and it's the same soul in a different person. It was far more sort of ground down and mixed up and forming new souls. So the people that have the Echo or can have the Echo, if we kind of keep that in mind, would be only the survivors of ancient Amarot that were not sacrificed to Zodiac. which would be only a quarter of ancient Amarot, because as we know, half of them were sacrificed to summon Zodiac, and then another half of those remaining were sacrificed to, keep him fueled. So you have a very, very small fraction of modern people that have inherited these ancient souls, and then everyone else have got these new souls, these lesser souls. So when we talk about like ethereal density as an indicator for power level, I know a lot of people try and do this sort of like Dragon Ball thing where we're trying to work out how powerful someone is based on how many times they've been rejoined. It doesn't really work, because the ancients, they were all different. They had different densities, firstly. And secondly, there's going to be a dramatic difference between the density of someone that has an ancient soul that's been rejoined a certain number of times and someone that has one of these new like post-Zodiac souls that's been rejoined a certain number of times. So then from this, we have a potential explanation for why the resonant is a fake echo or a false echo, as opposed to an echo that is just gained through an alternate means. And that is that their soul has been sort of reformatted to copy that of someone else's. So if we take $4, for instance, right? We have Kryl, who possesses the soul of this ancient person that has this certain color, this certain shape, this certain quality to it. And basically Kryl is taken, and her soul is used as like a mold or a blueprint. And the souls of a bunch of other people, a couple of dozen other people, are sacrificed, and they are pushed into this mold and into $4. So $4 is given basically a copy of Kryl's soul ultimately. So she ends up with the same sort of powers and abilities as Kryl does, but not because she's inherited this soul, but because she's now somehow got a copy of this soul. Then of course we come to Xenos, who's a real enigma for us, because we don't know who was used as the template for his resonant. It seems that he may have been put through this resonant process more than once. It seems that he may have already had the echo as a child before he was given the resonant. Either that, or he was given the resonant at a very, very young age, because he's been having these dreams of Amarot since he was a child, for as long as he can remember. I suspect that Emmett was probably experimenting through him on a way to bring back the ancients without having to rejoin all the shards, or to at least restore the sundered Aseans to something closer to their unsundered state. But Xenos is a real enigma. When Elidibus summons a simulacrum of Xenos for us to fight, it's beyond his comprehension. It's obviously well beyond Valen's comprehension when he's looking at the diamond weapon. Xenos, as far as we know, could be much denser and much more powerful even than the unsundered Aseans, which would explain an awful lot about him. And he could well be this weird sort of Frankensteinian amalgamation of like multiple different ancient souls all like mashed together. And that could of course help explain some of the particular character attributes of Xenos. So I know that was a little bit of a tangent. Those of you guys who catch me regularly on Twitch know that that's pretty much how it goes when you ask me lore questions, but I hope in there somewhere I did answer those questions that you guys had about the Echo, so thank you very much for that. Now, a lot of what we've been talking about today have been fairly speculative questions with subsequently speculative answers, and I certainly don't mind speculative questions, but I also think it's important to balance them with some that have some more concrete answers. So with that said, we're going to take another question from Fen Chan, and shout out to Fen Chan for being today's MVP, who asks, are the Lambs of Dalaimut still a thing? To put this in context for you, the Lambs of Dalaimut were a doomsday cult that appeared in Eorzea shortly before the Calamity, and are widely suspected to have been a plant by the 7th Imperial Legion and Nail Van Darnus to further destabilize Eorzea leading up to the completion of the Meteor Project. In essence, they worshipped Dalaimut and believed that he was going to descend from the heavens and eradicate all life in Eorzea, and subsequently continue descending into the seven hells to retrieve the souls of the devout and take them up to the seven heavens. Their activity was intended to be a facilitation of this end by kidnapping people from all over the realm to be used in ritual sacrifices to Dalaimut, ritual sacrifices that would normally end up in the summoning of void scent. They were somewhat dissuaded by the actual events of the calamity, no doubt, and largely went into hiding. We see them around in a realm reborn in their attempts to sort of take revenge on the Aeorzean peoples who they believe denied them their rapture, effectively. They summoned a soul flare into the body of King Galvanth of Gelmora down in the Tamtara Deepcroft, I'm sure you guys remember. And they also have stirred up similar kinds of trouble in the ruins of Amdapor Keep. Now, Koji Fox has actually been saying for years that he doesn't think that we're done with the Lambs of Dalaimut, and that he would like to have some more quests associated with them in the game. But we hadn't really seen hide nor hair from them until the Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 2. And since it answers Fenchan's question more or less directly, I'm actually going to read a couple of lines verbatim here from the section on the Lambs of Dalaimut. We're on page 25 of Encyclopedia Volume 2, if you would like to read along. So, it is quite possible that the beliefs of those cultists who survived the calamity were dismantled by the revelation Dalaimut was naught but an iron prison for the ethereal manifestation of a long-dead worm. Having lost faith, they simply abandoned the cult and returned to their old lives. Word from the Far East, though, may suggest otherwise. Adventurers and traders have brought back with them tales of intrigue, a swelling of the ranks of those scattered tribes who pledged spiritual allegiance to the Dusk Mother Nama, and the abductions that have followed. Is it merely coincidence, or could this prove the beginnings of something sinister? Only time will tell. Now, the rest of this section actually speaks to the fact that lunar cults seem to have been around for thousands of years and may have originated in the Azim Steppe when the Zayla witnessed the launches of the Allagan space program. As we know, it was pretty close by where they lifted Azus La from, which is now known as the Burn. And it's very likely that the Zayla also witnessed the launching of Dalaimut, and furthermore likely that this connects with their mythology of the Dawnfather and the Dusk Mother returning to the heavens after a period of protracted conflict. I'm sure it's no coincidence that the Dawn Throne very much resembles a bisected Dalaimut. As for the beginnings of something more sinister, well, we know as of 5.4, and we might be dating this episode with some 5.5 speculation, but Fandaniel has been talking about the Telophoroi, or the Bringers of the End, as it translates literally. Effectively, a doomsday cult, an organization dedicated to bringing about the final days. And what better pool of recruits than an already existing and well-established doomsday cult? Food for thought. Now I'm going to take just one more question here, and this one is of a slightly different flavor from Kazan Whitewind. And Kazan asks, what is Rowena's net worth by this point? Could she unseat Scrooge McDuck in the fiction Forbes wealthiest? Now, this is, of course, something that we don't know for a fact. We know that Rowena is very wealthy, but not quite wealthy enough to be on the Syndicate, so she's not quite at the same level as Godbert and Lolarito. Now, that said, we can actually do some numbers here. First of all, we'll work under the supposition that Rowena's overheads are pretty low. Everyone that works for her are effectively indentured servants who she has working off gambling debts that she herself basically maneuvered them into. Now, on my homeworld of Odin, any patch, any time outside of like immediately like post-patch raid gear crafting bonanza, you can usually find something that'll be worth about 5 tomestones of whatever current tomestones. It'll go for about 2,000 gil. So our conversion there is that 1 tomestone equals about 400 gil. Now, I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for about 7.5 years, which gives me 390 weeks. If I'm capping roughly half of those weeks, which I think is pretty reasonable, every second week I'd be getting 450 of the current tomestone and roughly 1,000 split between the others. So with 400 gil per tomestone multiplied by 1,450 tomestones multiplied by half of those 390 weeks, we're looking at about 113.1 million gross that Rowena would have earned from the tomestones collected by my character. Now, obviously, the 11 million players of Final Fantasy XIV is not something canonical to the world. So if we make a conservative estimate of 300 adventurers providing that kind of custom for Rowena, she's made just under 34 billion gil before her expenses and overheads, which again, I think are probably pretty low, and also before her investments, which I imagine are pretty significant. So 34 billion isn't quite Jeff Bezos money, and canonically isn't quite Godbert or Lolorito money, but it seems like Rowena's doing quite well for herself. Now that, of course, is just purely wild speculation, but Kazan, thank you very much for an entertaining question. As I mentioned before, most of the questions we've had today have been fairly speculative, and I certainly don't mind taking speculative questions. I enjoy making speculative answers, and I think together we can come to some pretty interesting and some pretty sound discussions. But please don't hesitate to ask some more literal questions if you have them. Perhaps you've just done 5.4 and are looking at this Hilfir guy and feel like he's supposed to be important, but you're not quite sure why. Or perhaps you're replaying A Realm Reborn and Urianger has just spouted some ether babble that you can't quite translate. So a combination of the two would honestly be ideal. I would like to once again thank Pascalus for the use of the backing tracks you guys have been hearing. He is making some absolutely fantastic lo-fi remixes of various parts of the Final Fantasy XIV soundtrack. I think he most recently put up Sea of Clouds, which is absolutely fantastic. I think it really helps contribute to the mood of these videos, and I really think you guys should go and give him some support and love. We're absolutely going to do at least a couple more of these videos before I take a step back and decide whether or not they should be a staple of the channel, but I certainly hope they will be. I'm certainly enjoying them. So if you guys are enjoying them as well, I would really encourage you to let me know and maybe consider sharing them with some friends so that I can see people are enjoying them. But for now, that's all we have. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. Be good and take care.